Welcome to Women Lead, a production of the Women of Color Empowerment Institute. We are your hosts. I'm Bernadette Norris Weeks.
I'm Michelle Austin Pammies.
And I'm Kathy Eggleston.
Our topic today is Women of Color, Protecting Our Reproductive Rights. Access to abortion has been a right of women for more than 50 years. This right is inextricably tied to our social, political, and economic liberation. Chances are you know someone who has had an abortion, and if you don't, trust me, you really do. This issue impacts millions each year and is particularly important for women of color. It is a healthcare issue. It has been turned into a political issue, but women of color are being left in the dust to figure it all out.
For decades, conservatives have worked hard to roll back a pregnant woman's right to an abortion. In states such as Florida and Texas, there are now laws requiring mandatory waiting periods. A recent bill that was passed in Florida goes further than any other large state by banning abortions after 15 weeks. Conservative legislators and anti-abortion activists across the country are becoming increasingly explicit about their goal of overturning Roe v. Wade to deny access to abortion care. And with a conservative majority at the Supreme Court, it is a real possibility.
Well, explicit racism creates barriers for women of color. For example, anti-abortion organizations have targeted Black women and Latinas with false and harmful rhetoric, claiming that women of color agree that abortion access should be further restricted. However, polling from organizations such as In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda, shows this to be patently false. A majority of women of color believe it is extremely important for women to have complete authority to make decisions about their bodies.
That's true, Kathy, and here are some facts about Black women in particular. We are facing significant barriers to accessing reproductive health care. We have been systematically denied resources, services, and information needed to make important personal decisions about our health care. We are more likely to lack access to comprehensive sex education and contraception. As a consequence, we experience higher rates of unintended pregnancy than women of any ethnic or racial group. Moreover, rates of unintended pregnancy among Black women more than double those of non-Hispanic white women.
We're also more likely to experience pregnancy-related complications or become gravely ill or die in childbirth. In fact, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Black women are nearly 4 times as likely to die of pregnancy-related complications compared to white women.
In nearly all aspects of reproductive health, women of color face poorer health outcomes than white women, from maternal mortality rates to cervical cancer. Additionally, women of color frequently have negative experiences in the healthcare system due to institutionalized racism and a history of control, coercion, and lack of bodily autonomy when it comes to their reproductive health and decision-making.
Well, ladies, this is a very, very hot topic in our country, and Women Lead takes on the tough discussions. So this is a conversation that we have to have.
That's true, Kathy.
Reproductive justice, reproductive health. For me, it's reproductive rights. This is my body. I believe that I have the right to make decisions about it. Reproductive rights. We need to talk about it.
We need to talk about it. And we have just the perfect person to talk with us today about this issue. She is an incredibly knowledgeable guest. She is Sonja Spoo from Ultraviolet. It is a feminist advocacy organization that is fighting for more inclusive advocacy representing all women. She is totally plugged into this topic, and we can't wait to hear from her. Stay tuned after these messages.
This is James.
Jimmy!
Mom, Dad, this is James.
Jimmy!
James? James Harrison from Roosevelt High?
Jimmy! Jimmy! Oh! You good, Jimmy?
The 2021 Toyota RAV4.
Jimmy!
The RAV for all of you. Right now, lease a new 2021 Toyota RAV4 LE for just $249 a month for 36 months. Toyota. Let's go places.
At the Women of Color Empowerment Institute, our mission is to enhance and expand leadership by women of color. We do this in a variety of different ways, including but not limited to providing mentorship opportunities for young professionals where we assist in helping to create paths to leadership. We empower women to develop capacities for social change. We produce programs that promote heritage awareness, and we provide training opportunities for business and government. Our institute holds seminars focused on professional success techniques, and we host many other events such as our popular Advocates for Change and Leaders Connect. The Women of Color Empowerment Institute publishes a magazine called Women Lead. Our signature event is the Women of Color Empowerment Conference, a yearly conference where hundreds of leaders gather from all across the United States and beyond. To learn more about membership and how you can support our programs or be a sponsor of the Women Lead TV, visit us at nationalwomenofcolor.com. Again, that's nationalwomenofcolor.com.
The law office of Austin Pammies Norris Weeks Powell is a full-service law firm practicing in the area of governmental law, including the representation of municipalities, civil litigation, personal injury, real estate, and corporate transactional matters. With over 100 years of collective experience, our attorneys are admitted to practice before state courts, federal courts, and the United States Supreme Court. We are conveniently located in downtown Fort Lauderdale and can be reached at 954-768-9770. Or for more information about the law firm of Austin Pammies Norris Weeks Powell, visit our website at apnwlaw.com. That's apnwlaw.com.
Welcome back to Women Lead. We are pleased to have with us Sonja Spoo, who's the Director of Reproductive Rights Campaigns at Ultraviolet, a community of 1 million people that drives feminist cultural and political change. Sonja works to conceive of and launch long-term and rapid response campaigns that advance reproductive freedom and justice. Welcome to Women Lead, Sonja.
Welcome, Sonja.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be with you all today, and it's a pleasure to be, especially in this moment, speaking about this critical topic.
Sonja, our show today is about women of color protecting our reproductive rights. So let's jump right in. Please tell us a little bit more about the organization Ultraviolet and your role.
Yeah, Ultraviolet is a 1.2 million member strong gender justice advocacy organization. We work around the country to, organize both online and offline to bring forth a more fair and just world for everyone. My role there is kind of twofold. I'm the director of federal campaigns and coalitions. I also help lead our reproductive rights portfolio. And so I work at the federal level to center the needs and voices of Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities and women in policy. So whether it's from trying to get something passed for the Build Back Better package that centers care and paid leave, all the way to abortion rights and protecting abortion rights and expanding abortion rights, and how those two things go together. Like, how can we flourish and thrive and build our families in the way that we feel called to, all the choices we should have available, and also have policies that support the ability for our families to flourish and to thrive. So I do all that work with the focus on centering the communities who are most impacted, the communities I come from and grew up in, and ensuring that our voices are absolutely paramount for policymakers.
Historically, U.S. movements for reproductive health and rights have centered on the needs of white, mostly middle-class women, especially in the fight for abortion access. Even though Black women and women of color have solidly supported these efforts, their contributions and needs are often sidelined, minimized, or erased from the narrative altogether. What efforts are being made to place more attention and focus on the needs of women of color when it comes to the topic of reproductive health?
I do think it's unfortunately true that for so long, at least the national reproductive rights movement has been, largely white-led. But at the state level, though, we know that the folks who've been holding it down, doing the work in the trenches, have been Black women, especially in the South and in the Midwest, both organizing their communities, providing abortion care, helping folks get care when they can't get it in their own state. And so the reality on the ground is that the leadership and wisdom and work of Black and Brown and Indigenous people is the work of the movement. Whereas there's that disconnect that you name at the national level in terms of how people think about the political aspect of the movement and the ways in which it's been guided. So we're kind of working to disrupt that in a couple different ways. First and foremost, we're thinking about how do we make sure there are people of color, Black women especially, in power at the national level who are making decisions about resources and support at national repro orgs. But it's more than just about representational politics. It's also about empowerment. When we do elevate Black and Brown leaders to, the executive director, president, vice president role, what does the board look like for that organization? Is the board still mostly white? Because that will absolutely impact the actual power someone has to enact the kind of internal change and the kind of external posture an organization can actually implement when it comes to centering our communities and those who are most impacted. So representation matters. Those people must also be empowered to make the necessary changes, and sometimes the hard changes and the uncomfortable changes, to make sure the movement is actually aligned with the needs and the wisdom of what we are seeing on the ground in the states and across the country. And the other aspect, of course, is you got to open your purse, right? Funding in the movement has been funneled in a way that has excluded Black and Brown-led organizations for way too long, and that has to change and is changing. It's something that we advocate for a great deal. Ultraviolet, something that I advocate for a great deal. That we are resourcing the leaders in the movement who are doing the work in the communities. That we are resourcing their ability to, continue to do that work and to be leaders in that work in a way that is both, recognizes the work that has been done, but also builds toward the vision of the work that we need in a way that's equitable, fair, and frankly, just strategic at the end of the day.
We often hear the terms reproductive health, reproductive rights, and reproductive justice used almost interchangeably. Do these terms all mean the same? If not, tell us the differences between the terms.
Yeah, so I think oftentimes they're conflated because we are the reproductive health, rights, and justice movement, right? So I think, unlike in many movements, perhaps, like these parts all kind of work together. Abortion providers are oftentimes some of the best organizers, and people who do policy are oftentimes also clinic escorts. So where our movement is very much collaborative in that way. But those are different aspects of the movement. So I'll take each one in part. So when we talk about reproductive health, we are talking about the literal ability to access not just abortion, but the full range of healthcare pertaining to our reproductive lives, whether that is birth control, whether that is treatment for endometriosis, for PCOS, for fertility or infertility, whether it's compassionate and affirming transition care for our trans siblings, as well as, of course, abortion care. These are all fundamental and basic healthcare needs, and that is in the purview of our providers, our clinicians, the nurses, nurse practitioners, and midwives, all of those folks. That is the access point for healthcare in the movement. In terms of reproductive rights, that is, I think, the part that maybe gets the most political attention, because it is political. It is about the legislative right or the fundamental legal right to abortion access or to reproductive health care, including birth control and the full range of care overall. And that is, of course, what we see right now with the Supreme Court leaked opinion from Justice Alito, the one that's getting a lot of attention because it's bedrocked in Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. And obviously, as you saw in the just egregious and cruel leaked Supreme Court decision, we are, facing the possibility, the strong likelihood that Roe will be overturned. So while abortion is still legal and accessible today, the Supreme Court, through that leak, has signaled that they are, aiming to change that reality. And so what that will mean is that the legal right, the constitutional right to abortion, will no longer be protective in a way that will allow us to continue to fight for it in the courts and lead to protecting access across the country. So the unfortunate reality is if this decision is the one that the court ultimately does decide is the final decision come June or whenever they release it, ultimately, many states across the country will move pretty quickly to ban abortion or heavily restrict abortion. We probably will see about 26 states do that in very quick order. Um, and there won't be a national right to abortion care, basically. So reproductive rights really focus on that legal right. But just to be very clear, even in the best of worlds where the court somehow does not overturn Roe or significantly gut the legal right to abortion, Roe has always been the floor and not the ceiling, even with Roe in the books and Casey in the books. Um, Black, brown, indigenous people, LGBTQ people, young people, people who live in rural parts of the country still struggle to have access to care because of the numerous amounts of barriers to care, like cost or lack of providers because of where they live being so isolated, or because of the restrictions that are in place under Roe, which kind of leads us to the next kind of praxis, and the one that I operate in, which is about reproductive justice. And at its core, RJ, or reproductive justice, is focused on the human right to control our sexuality, our gender, our work, and our reproduction. It comes out of the organizing and the thought leadership of Black and brown women, specifically from the South, who met in the mid 90s in Chicago, especially to discuss the ways in which, as you mentioned earlier, the white repro-led orgs were not meeting the needs of our communities in a way that actually led to sustainable and real solutions for the ways in which oppression works connectedly to harm us. And so at its core, reproductive justice is about the belief that all people should have the right to have children, the right to not have children, and the right to nurture our children in the safe and healthy environment that they deserve. All those things are under attack with the leaked Supreme Court draft opinion, which is why we are mobilizing so massively in this moment in the streets, in state legislatures across the country, in clinics, to respond in all the ways that this movement operates in health, in rights, in law, and in our communities, to make sure that we can protect our communities and protect access to healthcare.
Well, it often happens that the same people who work to rip down the social safety net for women by fighting against guaranteed good health care for women and their children are also the same people who want pregnancies to be carried to term when they may not be in the best interest of a particular family. Often these women feel scared and burdened that they're not going to be able to provide for their kids. How does your organization shed light on this type of hypocrisy?
Yeah, Kathy, that's such a great question. And you're right, it is deeply hypocritical. One of my hats that I wear at Ultraviolet is focused on federal policy, like I mentioned earlier. And we've been fighting tooth and nail for the past year and a half to pass the president's, Build Back Better agenda, which centers things like massive investments in childcare and childcare workers, helping reduce costs for families with children. The child tax credit, which when it was implemented last year, halved child poverty, and unfortunately expired at the end of last year. Paid leave, we don't have, to our disgrace, a national paid leave policy. So how are we going to force people to carry pregnancies to term but not give them the time off to heal? We don't have universal health care. We know that lack of access to health care is a main driver for maternal mortality, especially for Black and brown women. All these things kind of come together, and yet the very people who are pushing for abortion bans and who are pushing for the court to overturn Roe and Casey are either silent or opposed to the kind of life-giving policies that we've been fighting for at the federal and the state level for years. So not only is it deeply hypocritical, but frankly, it's cruel. And it highlights that this is not about life or families or family values. It's really about control. It's about control and this fear that drives white supremacy, I think, when it comes to white replacement and all these other awful kinds of things you hear on Fox News or alluded to, right? They ultimately do not want to actually help families live the best and most abundant lives. They want to control women in particular and pregnant people overall. And the cruelty is partially the point, right? It's about punishing people instead of seeing the ability to choose when to have your family as being a God-given blessing that we are asked to exercise with responsibility, and that we should have policies that enable us to make the best choices for us.
Anti-choice politicians want you to forget that reproductive rights are incredibly popular in the United States. You have been able to make a strong case as to why businesses should support reproductive rights. Tell us about the current state of this campaign to engage more business support for this issue.
Yeah, absolutely, Bernadette. Our Reaper Receipts campaign, which we launched in 2020, is all about calling out corporations who, through their political giving, give to anti-abortion politicians. Now, our argument is not that these companies are giving for any, ideologically anti-abortion stance, right? Which is what they always come out and say. We don't take a stance on abortion. What we argue is that whether you take a stance or not, your giving has an ideological impact that makes your actual silence or whatever really kind of not relevant. Because you're empowering those who are pushing these abortion bans that are directly harming the health, rights, and safety of your workers and of your consumers alike. Especially because, again, we see where the Supreme Court is headed. No one can pretend that the court's going to save us. We know they won't save us. They have rarely saved us in the past, and they're certainly not going to save us now. And so corporations have a responsibility to step up and protect their workers and consumers alike, and to stop funding those who are eroding our rights.
You and your colleagues working in this space of reproductive rights for women have found that the same people who are working against a woman's right to choose are also working against voting rights, against fair districts, against ensuring that people have decent health care in this country. Can you speak to these alliances, and since you deal with policy issues, give us some behind-the-scenes insight into how these issues progress at both the state and federal levels?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier. But it's kind of the same picture if you've ever seen that meme on Twitter, right? Like, let's look at, Florida, for example. The same folks who voted for the anti-protest bill, for the Don't Say Gay bill, are also the ones who voted for the 15-week abortion ban. These are not moderate positions. These are not compromise positions. These are direct attacks on our rights. And what Republicans understand is that if you can control people's political autonomy, you also can control their bodily autonomy and vice versa. We are hearing, what we saw at least in Justice Alito's draft opinion, which again, abortion is still legal. It's still a draft opinion. It's not final yet. But what we saw he was pointing to is that this should be an issue left to the states. But the states have already kind of anticipated that, right? And it's a real cruel joke that they say that this is up to the states when they're actively working to suppress people's ability to vote and to organize in their states, because they know that these policies are unpopular, that they are extreme, and that they are a direct attacks on our democracy. Because the simple fact is, we know that Republicans understand that they are in the minority, and that our communities have been mobilizing and organizing and building power together in a way that means that their, old white supremacist grip on power is fading, because we are deeply empowered now, and they are afraid of that. And so really, we have to understand that we can't simply fight these things in silos, that we have to fight them together. If you support voting rights and are a voting rights organizer, you need to be out front and speaking out about abortion rights and vice versa. If you are an LGBTQ ally or a member of that community, you are deeply impacted by abortion bans, and we are deeply impacted by attempts to restrict trans care for youth and for everyone. We are all connected in this fight, and we need to fight together to push back against attempts, whether it's the courts or state lawmakers or folks here in DC, to really roll back all the work we've done over the past 70 years. And I'll end on this for this question. I think we're in for a really tough battle ahead. I think we're going to have losses. We know we're facing a loss of the Supreme Court with abortion rights. There are many other cases for the Supreme Court this term that are also very dangerous, like the EPA case on the climate, the guns rights case as well. So we are in for some really tough times ahead. And we need to use every lever we have, being in the streets, organizing our communities, voting, every lever we have, corporate power, consumer power, to really mount a full force fight to get back our rights and to show them that they can't take us back. And we are the majority, and we have the power and the will and the strategy and the vision to really win this in the long run. It's just going to take a great deal of work, and we're going to have some losses along the way.
Thank you for joining us, Sonja. How can people learn more about your organization?
Well, thank you, Bernadette. Well, this having being on the show and having this conversation has been really just incredibly edifying and lovely. So thank you for your time and your questions. If you want to support Ultraviolet, I ask that you go to weareultraviolet.org. That's weareultraviolet.org, or find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, any of the social media platforms. I would also ask that you support the larger abortion rights movement in this moment of crisis as we respond to the leaked draft opinion from the court. You can do that in a couple of ways. Abortion funds and practical support networks provide baseline, resources of folks who are looking for abortion care, whether it's funding for the procedure, travel costs to cover if they had to go out of state, which is an increasing reality in states. They also help cover and provide, housing and transportation as well. There's volunteers who give up their whole day to drive people across state lines or house them in their homes. You can learn more about how to support abortion funds at nnaf.org. That's nnaf.org. Or just look up abortion funds, National Abortion Funds as well through Google, and they'll pop up for you. Also support, the Abortion Care Network. Most abortions are provided by independent clinics, which are clinics not affiliated with Planned Parenthood. So look up acn.org as well to support their work. And of course, also support Planned Parenthood, who is a leader in our movement and also does provide the full spectrum of care as well to folks. So support us at Ultraviolet, but also support our critical movement partners like Planned Parenthood, like independent abortion clinics, like abortion funds, who are really the front lines in providing necessary care to folks as they have to travel across state lines or just pay for abortion care, wherever they live, whether it's California or Texas. We are all in this fight together, and everyone needs support wherever they're at.
Well, that's our time for today. And until the next time,
Be empowered.